Sirius XM NBA Radio. Bri, good morning. Thanks for the time this morning. We appreciate it. Let's start here. What was your take on what you saw last night from Kyrie on Instagram?
Well, Kyrie's good at talking around things. He doesn't necessarily speak to things directly. I will tell you this. I saw a guy last night that, first of all, wanted to at least get some of his stance out so people in public understand him. I think, his silence publicly has put him in a spot where maybe he's aligned. I don't know if politically is the right word, but with some people I don't think he wants to be aligned with. And so I think he wanted to clarify some things there. The other thing I think he wanted to clarify is that he still has an intense desire to ply his craft and play basketball. And to me last night, Mark, above anything else, that didn't sound like a guy that didn't want to play, a guy that wanted to retire. He didn't sound anything like that. He sounded like someone who was kind of wanting to take a little more time to make a decision on what he thinks is a major decision for him and his family regarding the vaccine. A large majority of us don't necessarily agree with him and wanting to take that time. But ultimately what he is saying, it's his option. The one thing I kind of scratched my head a little bit with is when he talked about, promises that were made to him that there wouldn't be a mandate and he wouldn't be made to take the vaccine. I think as time goes on, he's got to understand that's not the NBA. And he did say this. It's not the NBA or the Players Association. This is the city that he is going to play basketball in, has a vaccine mandate for large groups. And he's going to be a part of that. So I think when you look at all that, there's a reality here that Kyrie wants to deny a little bit. But I thought his words last night, it brought him a little bit closer to understanding the reality that he's trying to deny. And I do think, at one point or another, he's going to get the shot in his arm.
Interesting. Brian, you know a lot about the Nets, and it looks like, at least from the outside, that the relationship between the Nets and Kyrie really hasn't been damaged too much by all of this. Do you think, A, that's actually true behind the scenes? Do you think there's any part of Kyrie that maybe feels a certain type of way about Kevin Durant and James Harden now basically moving on from him and not sort of staying with him in this fight?
Maggie, it's a great question. And I'm not sure. I think that ultimately, Kyrie can't be happy that those guys are moving forward. But I also think that one thing that's lost on Kyrie here, and it's not lost about anybody within the Nets, whether you look at the ownership group, the front office, the coaching staff, or the players, is that this is not an isolated incident with Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving has picked and choose times to not be there and not play for his team. And I do know this, there's serious doubts within the Nets organization. They're not sure he loves playing basketball anymore. He tried to dispel those notions last night, but the reality is he doesn't act it. Listen, he tried to have the whole bubble thing upended. He did not go to the bubble, and let's be frank about it. He had 5 months to heal. He was healthy enough to go play in the bubble. He chose not to play in the bubble. Last year, January 6th, he went ahead and took 2 weeks off. He was that upset over what was happening. And his communication with the Nets was not wonderful during that time. He didn't let them know where he was. It wasn't showing up. His communication was lacking. And I think the Nets look at this whole big picture over time and the amount of stress it's been on the organization and the amount of damage control that they've had to do. And I think they've had enough. And I think they kind of look at this thing as, we have championship aspirations. We have two guys in Durant and Harden that have a particular window that each year that goes on, that window's closing a little bit more. This is their best chance right now. And they don't want Kyrie damage control to upend any of that. So you have players that are absolutely 100% on board with this decision that's been made. It's something that ownership wanted to do. I thought Sean Marks handled himself fantastic in Tuesday's press availability in terms of how he handled that, and more importantly, how he wouldn't speak for the players, talked about the players that were involved in the decision, but wanted to let those guys speak for themselves. I think the Nets as an organization, their messaging is completely on point right now.
All right. Now, behind the scenes here, Brian, it's a player-driven league. Right, we know Kyrie is a huge star. We know Harden is a huge star, and we know that Kevin Durant has got the ear of Joseph Tsai, right? So none of this is happening. The about face that the Nets did, was it Durant driving it, Harden driving it, a combination of both? Where you go from one day Steve Nash saying we're preparing for him to be a part-time player to the next day saying we're not moving forward with Kyrie Irving being a part-time player.
Mark, I've heard some rumblings of this, and I think you can kind of connect the dots a little bit. There was 3 contract extensions on the table this summer for the Nets' 3-star players: Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. Kevin Durant signed his. We had news yesterday from Shams Charania of The Athletic that Kyrie Irving's was pulled. James Harden's is still there and hasn't been signed. And James Harden and media availability, and this kind of fell under the radar. Someone casually said, hey, I've never been a free agent before. Wouldn't it be interesting to explore that? You know what the Nets gave up for that dude last year? They don't want to hear that.
Right.
That they want him to sign that extension and want to know that they have him for the balance of his career with what they gave up for him. The other thing I know is, and this, talk to anybody within the Nets and they'll tell you this, James Harden is the vocal leader in that locker room. And I think there's legitimate concern on the Nets' part that their treatment of Kyrie with kid gloves here and giving him special treatment may be alienating James Harden. And I think when you talk about that worry, I think Kevin Durant falls into that category and that worry, because if you're Kevin Durant, who came here with Kyrie Irving, you have to look at him as less reliable than you thought he was 2 years ago. Harden is not. Harden is there and ready to play basketball. And I do think that a lot of this attitude towards Kyrie Irving is being driven by James Harden. Stephen A. Smith had that report earlier this week with from ESPN. To my knowledge, that's absolutely spot on. The Harden extension is something that is looming large here with the Nets, and I think it's part of a motivation to take this hard line with Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I guess like personality-wise, or just relationships-wise, you can understand Durant and Kyrie have this really deep relationship. They put each other's careers in each other's hands, right? And coming to Brooklyn together and starting this new chapter together. Harden was the late addition here. He's also the one guy out of the three who hasn't won a title yet and is still trying to add that to his legacy. Do you think the fact that Harden has yet to sign the contract and can kind of hold that a little bit over the Nets, do you think that kind of leverage has actually given him a more prominent voice with the Nets than even Kevin Durant, who already signed the extension?
No, Maggie, I do think that Harden had that prominent voice within the Nets before all this. Last year with the team, he was the vocal leader in the locker room from day one when he got there. And frankly, the ironic part is that a part of what helped him there was Kyrie Irving's total willingness to defer to him as the point guard. They got there, and a couple of games in, if you remember the story, and Harden and Irving both told it publicly. Irving looked at him one day in the locker room and said, dude, you're the point guard, I'm the shooting guard. And from there, Harden felt unfettered to be a leader. Kevin Durant and Harden are close friends as well. They were together in OKC. These are two guys that are totally comfortable together. And so Harden taking a leadership role is exactly what Kevin Durant expected. Listen, Durant's a leader as well, but Durant's very good at going about his business. And there's things Harden will do vocally that Kevin Durant just doesn't do. It's just not his style. But it's fine, and it fits, and it works. But Harden doesn't want any of that upending this. And if this Kyrie soap opera is going to be this, as Kyrie turns. And listen, I like Kyrie Irving. I understand. I don't necessarily understand this stance, but I'm a fan of Kyrie Irving, not only as a player, but as an individual. And I personally don't agree with he doesn't want to play basketball narrative. I think that he does want to play basketball. I think he just wants his life to be worth more than that. And I think he wants to get a message out on something he believes in, whether you agree with it or not. I just don't think his messaging is all that good. I don't think he goes about it all that well. And I do think that Kyrie Irving, as he goes forward and matures, is going to learn that the reckless abandon he's shown for his public image is damaging. And I think it's damaging him here with the Nets. And I think that he has to be a little more focused on that. This I don't really give a crap attitude about what people think about him is really, really hurting him. I mean, he had a thriving off-court business with this Uncle Drew thing. This movie was terrific, made a lot of money. Kyrie could have kept going with this stuff, but he's made himself publicly toxic. And I think that spilled over into how the Nets are viewing him right now. And the Nets are prepared to go on without him. And frankly, that may be the best way to get him back, being prepared to go on without him.
Yeah, my last one for you, Geltz, would be this. At some point this regular season, is Kyrie Irving putting on a Nets jersey and playing again for Brooklyn?
Absolutely, Mark. I think Kyrie Irving ends up coming back. I want you to keep something in mind. So, listen, January 6th rattled Kyrie in a big way, rattled a lot of us in a big way. None of us wanted to see, the country that we love have a democratic process that was put into that kind of peril. But most of us got up and went to work the next day. Kyrie did not want to do that and felt as though he needed some time. What's interesting is when he came back after the Harden trade was done and after Harden came out and started balling out for the Nets. And I don't want you to forget this about Kyrie Irving. The dude didn't get this good at basketball because he's not competitive. He's really competitive. And to me, he didn't rule out putting a shot in his arm last night. He made that very clear that he's not anti-vax. He just needs more time to think about it. Well, you know what? He'll get more time to think about it, but one of those things that may motivate him to come back to the Brooklyn Nets, maybe him seeing the Nets have success without him, and him, Kyrie helped put this together. He's the one that brought Durant to Brooklyn, and Durant brought Harden. Kyrie was kind of an architect in all this team being together. I don't think the competitive side of Kyrie Irving is going to want to see this thing go on without him. I think sooner rather than later, we'll see a shot in his arm, and he'll be back with the Nets.
Geltz, thank you. We appreciate it, bud. Have a good rest of your Thursday, all right?
Thank you, Brian.
Always my pleasure with you two. Anytime. Talk to you both soon. Take care.
You got it. Brian
Appreciate it.
Geltzeiler, Sirius XM NBA Radio. So interesting there about the Harden stuff.